What is going on, YouTube? This is Nick F1227. I am making the very first video I've made in years, and the goal of today is a little bit of a public apology, a little bit of a project announcement. So, Wendell and I had a very long conversation in his forums last week. I came into the forums very upset about the situation with Netgate. And Wendell helped realize that my frustrations and anxiety were misdirected. Netgate is really struggling with some marketing problems, but fundamentally, they're trying to do the right thing. They're contributing stuff back into the BSD code base. They're developing new features and putting it in Plus, but the stuff's all still under the Apache license. They're not doing anything evil. They're just trying to make some money, and they deserve it, right? They have done their dues, and they deserve to make money because we all got to eat. So I think today, first and foremost, I just want to apologize to Netgate for all the things I said and did last week. And I think that we can work together with the folks at Netgate if we want, because they're not bad people. But they're not the only firewall game in town, and OpenSense exists, DWRT, OpenArtWRT, Vios. There's so many options that are out there. None of them are really as good as pfSense in my opinion. But what's beautiful about the open source community and Level1Techs is we all have different opinions, and that's okay. Like, that should be celebrated. It is a garage, right? It is Silicon Valley, 1987, and we're just trying to experiment, figure out what does what. And that's the beauty of Level1Techs, and open source in general. So I want to propose to you guys what I think the path forward should be. And I think Wendell and I pretty much agree on what this looks like. If we consider for a moment the design of a enterprise network, you see that there's mostly the same common components throughout, no matter how big the companies are. You'll see that there are modular pieces of software and hardware appliances that have very specific, scoped, and narrow purposes. If we consider for a moment the topology of an enterprise network, that really gets us to a baseline understanding of how people that are smarter than us actually do this for a living. A lot of this is different pieces, right? So we have an internet connection, we have a firewall, we have a layer 3 switch, we have a VMware or a Hyper-V server or XEPNG or Proxmox, and we have storage, whether it be TrueNAS or NetApp or Pure or any number of vendors. And what you'll notice is that there's a pretty common thread between enterprises where you see these logical chunks of things separated out into like their individual purposes. You don't see a lot of general purpose boxes that do lots and lots of services, and there's a good reason for that. The more stuff that you bake into any of these individual components, the more complicated it is, and the more complicated it is, the more security risks there are. The more security risks there are, the more stability concerns there are too. About 2 years ago, Wendell started the Forbidden Router series. What he did was not particularly new, and that's the elegance of the Forbidden Router series. He took all of those components, the firewall, the switching, the hypervisor, the storage, all of it, he put it all inside of one box. But the way Wendell did that is important. He didn't have a single operating system running gajillions of services. He had a bunch of containers. He had a bunch of virtual machines. There was a logical separation between all of those things, even if they were physically inside of the same box. And that is the integral piece of the puzzle that we need to consider. In Firewall Land 101, one of the first things you learn is the management, the control, and the data planes should all be separate. The design that Wendell created was to keep the control and data planes separate. That was the elegance of the Forbidden Router project. The problem remained, though, is that we had a bunch of separate management planes. Control and data planes should be separate. Management planes can be shared. That's why we have things like vCenter. That's why we have things like True Command. I think NetGate's also working on developing their own version of that. Having a unified single pane of glass to control all of your stuff. That is what's missing inside of the home lab firewall space. We have all sorts of cool stuff that you can do. There's probably dozens, or if not hundreds, of these like home lab front page things, right? And I think the closest thing that we have as a community right now, as a centralized place for management plane, would be Grafana. But the problem is that Grafana isn't managing anything. It's just a window into insights. That can be part of what exists in the management plane, but really what we need is a UI that works kind of like what Ubiquity does. It's a single pane of glass. It has, you know, different apps that you can click in. Those different apps do different things, but they all live inside of the same box. Unify really did exactly what Wendell did. They took a bunch of stuff, smushed it into a single box, and then they wrote this layer of abstraction that they called Unify OS. Unify OS is just a bunch of pieces. And that is what I propose. I propose to you guys here at the Level1Techs community that we build this single pane of glass. Grafana probably should be part of it. Maybe pfSense is part of it. Maybe OpenSense is part of it. But really, we just need right now to decide on the base. I resolve that we recognize as a community that we are all standing on the shoulders of giants. Those giants are in YouTube. Back in the day, Know How was a channel that I loved. There was a guy named Patrick Norton and Michael Hand, and they took a bunch of crappy old computer parts and built a FreeNAS server. That's kind of my origin story. There's some whole bunch of others. There's Father Robert Balliser was another fantastic guy. Wendell from Level1Techs, obviously, but that was Tech Syndicate back then. And then if we consider all the different projects that people use in the home lab, whether it's Grafana or pfSense or FreeNAS or TrueNAS, there's a common narrative thread of what people use, and it comes from the fact that there are a bunch of these disjointed random enterprise projects that got trickled down into the home lab community, and like we need to celebrate and embrace that. We need to build a product from that place of stability. Enterprise grade stuff is hard to use. So how do we reconcile that? Right? And the answer, I think, is we just build a single pane of glass. Wendell's design for the Forbidden Router was perfect. He took and modeled the enterprise, and then he just took all of those modular pieces. He kept them separate, but he put them all inside of a single box. So the data plane and the control plane remain separate. The problem with that design is that the management plane also remains separate. So I resolved that together as the Level1Techs community, we build a better router, but we build a better router by starting from a place of building a better front end. And then we're putting the cart before the horse, aren't we? But I resolve that we're not, because good stuff already exists. APIs exist. We don't have to rebuild the firewall. We don't have to rebuild the DNS server. Those are already there. Pi-hole's great. pfSense is great. We just need to build the management plane. And I want your help to do it, because I'm not smart enough to do it alone. So I resolved that together as a community, we're going to embark on a journey together. I'm going to try and gamify and crowdsource the creation of a front end for the firewall. And if everything works, we can build an appliance. We can ship an appliance that anyone can use. You can give it to your uncle. You can give it to your crazy cousin. Like, it can be that plug-and-play firewall that you buy at the Walmart, but it'll be better if you need it to be. You can take and start tweaking things. When they call you 6 months later after you give them that firewall, you can go back into the logs, tell them exactly what's wrong, and fix it for them. We're all of our family's IT guys. Let's literally solve the problem of, how do I make my life easier in the future? And I think if we start from that baseline, we can do some really cool things. Catch you later, guys.